Shadow and Bone really has it all. Fantasy action, gunslinging, interesting lore, and all the smoldering looks you could possibly want in a TV show. As much as fans loved this series, there's one thing they need more than anything else right now: a reason to watch it again. Luckily, I've got you with all the Easter eggs, book changes, and secrets you need to make for a satisfying rewatch to 2021's biggest hit so far. If what you really need is more Shadow and Bone, there's a really easy way to jump right back into Ravka. If you didn't know already, the show is based on an extremely popular and prolific book series from author Leigh Bardugo, known as the Grishaverse. The first book, which shares the series title Shadow and Bone, is the first book in a trilogy. Beyond that, there are a ton of short stories, 2 duologies, and companion books. So if you need to quench your thirst for more Grisha action, Bardugo has practically provided an ocean. Overall, Shadow and Bone stays relatively close to the spirit of the books, a lesson a lot of fantasy novel adaptations could learn from. Ahem. Artemis Fowl, I'm looking at you. That being said, the series does take a few liberties with the source material that has divided a lot of the fanbase. For example, Alina went through some big changes. The character overall has a lot more agency than her book counterpart. Also, in order to include more diversity, the series came up with the idea that Alina was part Shu. While a lot of fans liked her enhanced personality, the constant scenes of people hating on Alina didn't sit well with everyone. In the series, Mal is kind of the ultimate love interest. Well, he would be if the Duke of Hastings from Bridgerton didn't exist. Mal's kind treatment of Alina and his constant drive to action basically made him a Disney prince. In the books, however, he isn't nearly as ideal. The relationship between Mal and Alina was always strong, but it was enhanced both by altering Mal's personality and the electric chemistry between actors Jessie Mei Lee and Archie Renault. This was one change most book fans seem to be very happy about. Pretty much every Shadow and Bone fan is still fanning themselves over some of those scenes between General Kirigan and Alina. There's no doubt that Ben Barnes made the Black Heretic a full-blown internet sensation. It's kind of strange to think of how different the character could have been, though. Most notably, the whole General Kirigan thing is a title the series pushes, not the books. In the series, he's primarily just referred to as the Darkling. The producers wanted to ground the character a bit more and thought calling him Darkling might give away that he was a villain. I mean, all of us have seen like 30 YA adaptations by now. We all knew he was the bad guy from like scene 1, right? Submit to me! While Alina Starkov was the main character of the series, many fans ended up getting more wrapped up in the plots of the fiendish crows, who go from the Sun Summoner's would-be captors to her saviors by the season's end. So it's kind of wild to learn that the crows weren't actually in the first Grishaverse book at all. Even though they seemed like an integral part of the first season, the crew was actually lifted from the Six of Crows duology and placed in the main plot. This was because... well, do I even have to explain? Look at how cool they are! Of course the producers figured out a way to bring them in. How could you not? One of the biggest challenges the writers had adapting the first season was how they were going to put the crows into the story. Not only did they have literally nothing to do with the opening Sun Summoner arc, they also come from an entirely different part of the world. These questions ended up providing their own answers as they had to formulate a heist involving Alina and a complex way for them to cross the fold. This ended up lending the season some of its most exciting new moments for both new fans and old fans alike. Full disclosure, Jesper Fahey is by far my favorite character in the series. I mean, he's a quick-witted, gunslinging, gambling addict with more charm than bullets. As much a fan of Jesper's as I thought I was, there's one person who is almost certainly his biggest fan, actor Kit Young. The young Shakespearean actor was so fond of the character that he went out and learned a ton of cool gun tricks. Despite being somewhat scared of breaking his prop guns at the beginning of the series, he became an expert by season's end. Now we get to see just how good a gunslinger Kit Young really is. I don't know about you, but that sounds like exactly what Jesper would do. Kaz Brekker is everyone's favorite criminal mastermind right now. Well, him and Zemo from Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I guess. The one thing Kaz is known for above all else is being prepared for pretty much any situation. I mean, he squared off against the Darkling and lived to tell the tale. Well, apparently this is something that he and actor Freddie Carter have in common. In order to prepare for the role, Carter learned a sleight of hand trick so that he could embody Kaz more. Hopefully his method acting didn't lead him learning how to be a criminal mastermind as well. Wait, on second thought, hopefully it did. That'd be awesome. Inej may be the most complex character in the series. She's a devoutly religious assassin who has lived as a performer, a slave, and as part of a criminal crew. The show actually dove deeper into her story than even the books did. When we meet Inej in Six of Crows, she's already pretty adept at the art of stabbing and has overcome her servitude to the menagerie. The writers wanted to give Inej a long arc through the series that would see her arrive where we first meet her in the first Crows book over time. I don't think it's controversial to say that the train ride sequence in Shadow and Bone introduced the best new character in the series. No, I'm not talking about you, Arkin. Sure, the conductor was also an addition for the series, but he definitely isn't the show's best new character. That is 100% the goat named Milo. It turns out that the goat wasn't for the mission, for the Volcra, or even for Jesper. He was for us. And now I can't wait for the Milo the Goat animated spin-off. The Crows weren't the only duology characters who were brought into the story. The surprisingly heartwarming story of Nina Zenik and her witch-hunting captor, Matthias, was inserted alongside all the sun-summoning action of Alina and the Darkling. In the end, the series even does the impossible by bringing every single separate plot together onto one boat. Will Alina and the Crows both help Nina recover her boyfriend and convince him not to hate her again? I guess we'll find out. The other character in Shadow and Bone who got a big character arc glow up was Zoya you know what, I'm just gonna call her Zoya. She does eventually betray the Darkling in the books, but not as early as she does in the series. Nor does she get quite the same level of time to introduce herself. This kind of thing really exemplifies why book adaptations to TV can be so great. Smaller characters can often get bigger arcs to justify hiring legions of talented actors. I, for one, can't wait to see how Zoya rages out after she searches through the remains of what the Darkling did to her home. At this point, it should be no surprise that the cast got really into filming the show. Not only did they all read the books, but a lot of them did a good deal of their own stunts. Some of them even have the scars to prove it. Apparently, during one of Amida Sumon's various fights as Inej, she looked down to see blood dripping everywhere. She was even more surprised to see that it was her that was bleeding. It turns out it was no big deal, and she's actually proud of the scar it made once it healed. You know what? I bet Inej would be proud too. There was one moment in Shadow and Bone that was really gruesome. I mean, there were a lot of gruesome sequences, but only one that was like, did they really just go there? That would be, of course, the moment where the Darkling has the stag collar literally bonded into Alina's flesh and collarbone. It's a truly harrowing sequence that makes the scene about more than just Kirigan taking control of Alina, but implies something even worse. In the books, this was literally just a collar, so it was quite the shock for everyone. The producers weren't actually trying to make the show's most gruesome image, but actually had logistical concerns about the Amplifier's look. I feel like there was probably a compromise in between a cumbersome spiky necklace and literally grafting it onto her bones, but they didn't ask me. The romantic sequences in Shadow and Bone were instantly iconic. I mean, there's no shame if you had to hit that rewind 15 seconds a few times. A lot of the credit for those sequences goes to the writers for the show. Both sequences were in the books, but were played very differently. In the show, Alina was the one who initiated their physical relationship, and even when Kirigan took control, he made sure to check that she was sure. This was very important for the producers to show the importance of consent to a largely young female audience. Ben Barnes absolutely killed it as the Darkling this season. It's no surprise that Barnes fell into the part so effortlessly, seeing as he's an expert in both the YA fantasy genre and Netflix villainy. His big break was playing Prince Caspian in the Chronicles of Narnia series. He's also starred alongside John Bernthal as Billy Russo in The Punisher. That guy really can't make it through a first season without gnarly face scars, can he? Most notably, he appeared alongside Shadow and Bone co-star Archie Renault in Gold Digger, so yeah, there's plenty more Kirigan to go around. The big draw of Shadow and Bone is that big, shadowy expanse that runs for miles known as the Fold. Where exactly did Leigh Bardugo get the idea for a big patch of darkness that stretches across a continent? According to the author, the Shadowfold was inspired by other fantasy series. In many other stories, darkness is a metaphor, but Bardugo was inspired to make it literal. She wanted to ask what would happen if darkness was a place. Well, we certainly have our answer, and it is a horrifying, monster-ridden nightmarescape. Shadow and Bone features several different countries, religions, and cultures across the Grishaverse. Each of these distinct cultures have their own unique language. If that reminds you of Game of Thrones, it's no big surprise. The Grishaverse has David J. Peterson to thank for the languages. The American language creator worked on the famous HBO series and helped bring about languages like Dothraki to the big screen. If you like his work, listen closely to works like Raya and the Last Dragon, Motherland, Fort Salem, and the new Dune movie. Not only does he have the coolest job ever, but he could probably tell you about it in a dozen languages he made up himself. How cool is that? It's almost exhausting how many fantasy series are based on British history. That's why it was instantly refreshing to start Shadow and Bone and discover that the series was based around Russian history instead. Apparently, Bardugo was fascinated by the extremes of 19th century Russia. While it is commendable that she took inspiration from a different part of human history than most fantasy series, many critics complain that her depiction of the era isn't exactly accurate. My guess is that they had fewer gargoyle-like monsters flying around in a shadowy expanse. I feel like I would have remembered that in history class. The first season of Shadow and Bone had one very special cameo that pretty much everyone missed. That's because it wasn't an actor or even a person at all. It was actually a book. In one scene, you might remember Jesper going on and on about a book in his hands. If you look closely at the book, you might notice that there's something familiar about the cover art. That's because the book is actually called Shadow and Bone. The reason that it slipped past so many people is that it is written using a fictional alphabet. I really hope they keep this up every season so that each and every book can have a cameo. It could be like this franchise's version of Stan Lee. The first episode ends with a literal bang where poor Alexei gets blown away right after escaping the fold. Talk about going from basically winning the lottery to getting struck by lightning in the same week. In the books, this is arguably even worse. Instead of getting a bullet, Alexei is left in the fold where we can assume he becomes a Big Mac for a family of Volcra. The reason for this is that they needed Alexei to act as the trigger for the crows to enter the conflict. So at least those extra 45 seconds of screen time had a purpose. Probably the biggest secret in every episode of the series comes right at the very beginning. Each title sequence features a slight variation on the formula that highlights what the episode is about. For example, the first episode features a giant burst of light that hints at the Sun Summoner's business at the episode's end. In stark contrast, the last episode features darkness creeping over light, signifying the characters entering the fold. Pay close attention to each title sequence and be prepared to be impressed. Kaz has one of the best wardrobes in the entire series, hands down. Not only does he have the perfect criminal sense of style, but it also reveals a lot about his character. Kaz doesn't wear gloves just because it makes him look cool. He does it because he hates the feel of human touch. His cane also has a special meaning. He uses it because author Leigh Bardugo has osteonecrosis, which sometimes requires her to use a cane. This is the inspiration for Kaz's limp in the series. Perhaps the best thing about this is that Freddie Carter ended up stealing his gloves and cane and took them home. Huh, guess he did become a master thief after all. Knew it. If you think that Shadow and Bone has an incredible cast already, just wait. There are actually more fan-favorite characters who are on the way. Nikolai Landstoff is a charming privateer who has a mysterious past that becomes very important later on. Then there's Wylan Van Eck, who becomes a big part of the Crow's storyline, especially where Jesper is concerned. Fans are already speculating wildly about who could play these characters in the future. Some fans hope that they would appear in the first season like other characters who got an upgrade. But they revealed before the series began that we'd have to wait for Season 2. What a tease. So a Season 2 of Shadow and Bone is basically a given at this point, am I right? The series is the kind of massive hit that you know HBO Max would love to have right now. A second season is pretty likely, but there are much wider plans for the series in the air already. The producers have 5 more seasons in mind for the main Shadow and Bone series. Aside from that, there's also a distinct possibility that spin-offs are on the way too. Are we on the verge of a full-blown Grishaverse cinematic universe? Oh, I hope so. Seeing how big the Grishaverse is, chances are Netflix will be rolling out new seasons of Shadow and Bone for years to come. That being said, I think a Six of Crows spin-off series would be amazing if you ask me, Netflix. Please ask me, Netflix.